Dutch soldiers knew, or should have known, that the men were not only being screened for war crimes, but were in real danger of being subjected to torture or execution.
2 decades on, a court in The Hague has confirmed that the Netherlands was partly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Muslims during the Bosnian War. Around 300 people tried to seek refuge at a base run by Dutch troops working as UN peacekeepers in Srebrenica. They were fleeing Bosnian Serb troops, which eventually overran the area. But the peacekeepers expelled them, leaving them to their deaths. This latest ruling upholds an early decision that the troops could have known the refugees would be killed if they were forced to leave. The court says the Netherlands should pay just 30% of damages to victims' families, which relatives say is an injustice. Around 8,000 Muslim men and boys were killed by Bosnian Serb troops at Srebrenica. It was Europe's worst mass killing since the Second World War. Well, joining us now from The Hague is international criminal law specialist Toby Cadman. Toby, good to have you on the program. So, partial damages to be paid because the Dutch are partially responsible. Was it a fair ruling, in your opinion?
I think it was the right ruling to award compensation and to hold the Dutch soldiers liable. It is obviously disappointing that they've reduced the level of damages to 30%, based on the court's finding that that was the level of culpability. But I think it is nonetheless an important ruling and something that the lawyers for the mothers of Srebrenica that have been pursuing for a number of years. So, and of course it will have far-reaching consequences outside of Srebrenica as well for UN peacekeeping missions.
As we talk about culpability, something that immediately stands out is in the judgment, the judge saying that there was a 70% chance, based on her assessment and her team's assessment, that those men and boys would still have died had they been given safe refuge amongst the Dutch peacekeepers, and therefore the Dutch only pay 30%. How is there a legal mechanism to sort of determine that 70-30? Because when you first read it, it sounds like a bit of a thumbsuck. Is that me just being completely legally illiterate?
No, not at all. I mean, it's an entirely superficial assessment, because you can't possibly make such a determination that these men and boys would have been killed. They were under the protection of the UN. There was a decision to provide a safe haven to Muslim men and boys in the Srebrenica area. So to say that 70% likelihood of them dying anyway, it's a fairly superficial assessment to make.
President of Mothers of Srebrenica, Munira Subasic, says the verdict is shameful. We will not accept it. She's called it a great injustice, and that the Dutch state should take its responsibility for our victims, because they could have kept them all safe on the Dutch Bat compound. So she's not happy. Many, friends and families of victims aren't happy. What sort of legal avenues do you think are left? What avenues remain for them, given that the court has ruled now, and many people would say, hey, it's done and dusted. We know Ratko Mladic and the Serbs were responsible. The Dutch were partially responsible. We all have to heal and move on.
Well, I completely agree with Munira's dissatisfaction and the dissatisfaction of victims generally, because this is a slap in the face. The Dutch soldiers were responsible. I think, of course, it's right that the official Serb soldiers are held accountable, like Ratko Mladic and also Radovan Karadzic, but also you have to take the point that they were under the protection of the UN. The UN had a duty to protect them, and they handed them over. So of course they have to be held accountable. Now, where the legal team takes this now will be a matter for consideration as to whether they take it higher, whether they take it elsewhere. But obviously it is limited to what they can do now. But when you talk about it's time to move on, it's very difficult for these groups, these individuals that have lost almost their entire families to move on. Bosnia and Herzegovina is still in a period of confrontation. It has not reconciled with the conflict of 92-95, and you can't have any real reconciliation unless you have truth and justice. You need to establish a process where these individuals have some satisfaction that they have received some form of a just verdict in a court. And I think they're quite right to say that this is not a just verdict. It is, of course, an important step, but it doesn't go anywhere near as far as we would have hoped.
Yep, Toby Cadman, good to get your thoughts and expertise. Thanks so much for joining us.